Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest in the Innovation Network webinar series from MIT Sloan Executive Education. It's great to see all the greetings coming in from all over the world. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. As you now know, we, in the aftermath, or at least the midst of the COVID crisis that's gripping really the whole world, we increased the frequency of these webinars, and we also moved to this new short format of 30 minutes, realizing how much time we're all spending staring at screens. We are bringing in a variety of speakers, mostly all from the MIT faculty, to talk about their work and ideas that we hope will be useful to you and all of us as we're grappling with these challenging times. Today we have an interesting departure. I'm delighted to be introducing our first guest speaker in this webinar series, a gentleman by the name of Patrick Sweeney. Patrick is a best-selling author, and I've been avidly rereading his book, actually for the third time. You'll be pleased to hear, Patrick, that I'm still dipping into it and finding useful things in this. Patrick's a serial entrepreneur. He's been a founder and CEO of several technology companies. He's also an Olympic-level athlete. He's often described by people who know him as the fittest person that they've ever met. He most recently, as I mentioned, is an author of this book and has been helping various organizations and individual executives really learn from his own personal journey, during which he has really, and you'll hear some more of this, scoured the whole world for the greatest thinking and ideas to help him understand this topic. And it turns out many of those were at MIT, which is one of the reasons that we got to know Patrick. So I want to hand right over to Patrick. We're going to have some opportunities to have Q&A at the end, so please feel free to ask questions as they occur to you in the Q&A box. But Patrick is going to discuss a couple of headline issues here. The question of how do we reprogram our brains? And yes, it is possible. And in particular, how do we reprogram the part of our brain that helps us turn fear from something that's paralyzing into something that's enabling? And with that, Patrick, I'd like to hand over the stage to you, and we'd love to hear more.
Dean Hurst, thank you all very much. And the MIT community, thank you so much. I've got some connections from past companies and that sort of thing. I love MIT, and I love the passion and innovation with everyone. So I'm really thrilled to be here and to see people from all over the world. And what I hope to find out is have all of you reached your full potential? Have all your dreams come true? And if the answer is that you haven't yet figured out how to get everything out of life, then what I've put together today is for you. I'm going to share a method, as Peter said, based on my 6 years of neuroscience research with 32 of the world's most innovative and exciting neuroscientists. That's so simple, even a caveman could do it. So let me explain. 2 million years ago, our ancestors programmed the fear center of our brain, which is called the amygdala, to be an early warning system for danger. So the amygdala, as you'll see here, is this little gland at the base of your brain. It activates the fight or flight response, and it's wired into our DNA. So the amygdala is the reason we want to be right, and the amygdala is the reason we judge other people. The amygdala is also the root of intolerance. So when someone's different, that makes us scared, and that creates uncertainty. Are they friend or are they foe? We don't know. That insecurity drives a need to feel safe and a need for certainty that prevents us from reaching our potential. The uncertainty of these times prevent us from reaching our potential unless we're aware of them, unless we can reprogram our mind, because it's fear that holds the secret to our potential, having a relationship with fear. Greatness requires using fear as fuel. So you're about to learn 3 ways to burn fear as a super high performance fuel. But first, you've got to understand a little bit of neuroscience. Now, I'm one of the few people who nerds out on this stuff a lot. So when the going gets all big brain on us, I'll let you know with a nerd alert. But we're going to start out by testing your neuroscience knowledge based on some work from one of the best neuroscience researchers I've ever met, Dr. Earl Miller, who's at the Peak Hour Institute in MIT. He's done wonderful things with something called the working memory. where we store information that we're using at the moment. So Michelle, if we could pop up this first question, and we'll take a quick poll. I want everyone to chime in with your answer about your ability to multitask. And while everyone's answering this one, I'll ask Peter, who, just as a spoiler alert, already knows, but Peter, tell me your multitasking capability.
Well, I'm obviously brilliant at it because I'm listening to you, I'm watching the chat, I'm watching the Q&A, I'm doing my emails, I'm looking after my, actually the last two I'm lying, but the other three things I am doing right now.
Okay, well, Michelle, why don't we pop up the answer, and if someone could let us know how that came out.
So we have 20% of people said they can juggle like Penn and Teller, 39% can walk and chew gum, and 41% say they have to focus on one thing at a time.
Okay, that 41%, good on you. Congratulations to everybody, because that's the truth. In reality, there is no such thing as multitasking. When we go between different tasks, what we're doing in our working memory is stopping basically a tape that's running, going to another tape that has a different subject, rewinding it to reset ourselves to where we are, and then starting again. So Dr. Miller suggests this takes about a second to switch in between tasks. And in fact, he calls it multi-switching. So we lose about 20% of the information, and it's about 20% slower when you multitask versus focusing on something like being present for a webinar. So one of the anecdotes for that is to set aside focus time. I do this every day. I set several 40-minute blocks where I'm just going to work on one thing, shut off the phone, shut off the email, just so I want to capture that extra 20% of efficiency. Now, did most of you predict that that was the case? So if you did, share it in the chat with us, because one of the things I want to share is our brain is a prediction engine. We forecast the outcome of every moment. So for instance, if you walk into a dark room and you flip the light switch, your brain is going to predict that there's a 95% chance the light turns on and maybe a 5% chance it doesn't turn on. If it doesn't turn on, you're further going to predict that there is a 88% chance the bulb's burnt out and a 12% chance that the circuit breaker is blown. So all of those things are that prediction. Those predictions are based on our past experiences that are stored in this massive hard drive called your subconscious mind. So here's a nerd alert for you. All of your life experiences make up what neuroscientists call your prior beliefs. So now, if you went and unscrewed that light bulb to change it and 50 baby snakes came slithering out on top of you, you'd freak out, because that is probably not in one of your prior beliefs, baby snakes coming out of a light bulb. So it creates uncertainty, just like this COVID virus, just like people we've never met before or don't know. And uncertainty to our caveman ancestors usually ended up in death. So what they did is they'd run back to their cave where they knew they'd be safe. Well, we don't have caves anymore, but we do have couches and we do have offices. Oh, sure. Some of you might have a really cool man cave or she shed, but that's not what I'm talking about. The couch or the office is the new cave. It's where we go to feel safe. And it's also where we go to miss life's greatest opportunities. Because by nature, by the design of that amygdala, we default to defense. At the first sign of uncertainty, we feel disempowered. And out of instinct, we shut out other beliefs and ideas we don't understand because they're scary. When in fact, we need to do just the opposite. We need to find more fear every day. If there's something you could take away from this, it would be to make yourself uncomfortable every day. Because the truth is, all of your dreams are on the other side of fear. The Garden of Eden is a long way from this dark, dank cave. And you've got to cross this vast jungle to get there. But you can't know when you step out into the jungle what's going to happen. It's full of uncertainty. So that's when your fear center explodes. Warning, warning. And it screams to you. And then you feel disempowered. So I'm sure you felt those warning signals before, probably today, or certainly within the past week. You get butterflies in your stomach, your jaw tightens, your heartbeat picks up, you start taking short breaths. So here's a nerd alert. It's called an amygdala hijacking. Physiological changes are prepping your body and mind for the most effective fight or flight. They make you stronger. They literally make you smarter. That 2 million-year-old piece of software running on your amygdala is telling you you're in danger. So we default to defense to make that feeling go away. You go hide in your cave. Now, why is hiding in your cave and letting the amygdala take over the worst possible thing you can do? Well, unless, of course, a saber-toothed tiger did make it into the back of your Prius. There are still a few rare occasions when that amygdala knows well and can help you out. But most of the time, it robs us of opportunities in our life. And the majority of people won't find this out until it's too late. So sadly, they're going to have one common gnawing feeling as they lie on their deathbed. Regret. They're going to feel cheated. How do I know this? Because I felt it. 16 years ago, I was running one of the most hottest technology startups in the US. With technology I spun out of MIT. But I was so full of fear that I had to drink 6 or 7 beers every day just to keep those anxiety wolves at bay. I was scared of rejection. I was scared of failure. I was afraid of abandonment. Most of all, I was terrified of flying. So my fear response, that amygdala, was constantly activated. Fear opened up a fire hose of cortisol. That's the stress hormone. And it was flooding my body and I just couldn't shut it off. So that combination of stress, cortisol, anxiety, and drinking drove a lifestyle that almost ended in disaster. Not surprisingly, I got really sick. I went to my local doc in Reston, Virginia, and he did a few tests, and he said, you have no immune system, but we don't know why. We're going to send you to Johns Hopkins, one of the best hospitals in the world. My 1-year-old daughter went to her grandparents' house, and my wife and I went up to Hopkins to endure this battery of tests and evaluations that ended in a nightmare scenario of Dr. McHale coming in and saying, look, this leukemia is very rare, very rare. You should put your affairs in order and say your goodbyes. My wife was 6 months pregnant and she went into shock. I know, right? Can you imagine how I felt? That's when regret hit me like a baseball bat in the stomach, or as my friends in Ireland would say, a hurley to the stomach. I looked back on my life and I saw made up excuses to avoid embarrassment, to avoid rejection, to cover shame, and the most of all, to avoid flying. There were no raucous spring breaks for me, no exciting family reunions or exchange programs. Nope. Fear buried the happiest moments in my life in an early grave. I spent the first 35 years on this planet hiding in a cave with my shame, running from fears. And now I looked back and I realized I was never going to make it to the Garden of Eden. Well, the surgery was risky and the treatment was quite a gamble, but even amidst that drama, my thoughts switched from me to my daughter, Shannon. Was the memory she going to have of her father, a guy who was too big of a coward to get on a plane and take her to Disney World or let her see the world? She deserved better than that. So can you remember doing something that was really scary? Peter, I'll ask you, and I ask everyone else to put something in the chat. What's the scariest thing you've ever done? Peter, I know you were afraid I wasn't going to show up on time, so you've already been scared today, but what else?
When you stepped off camera 1 minute to get before the webinar, I was a little bit worried, I will confess. But probably in recent memory, it was more of a physical than an existential fear. I was given the present of getting to race in a NASCAR. Wow. Which, it turns out pretty scary.
Very scary. So might be a roller coaster. It might be making a toast at a wedding. But how did all of you feel just beforehand? Share that with us, because that's when you're most scared. It's never the event. It's always just before it when fear is the strongest. That's how you know it's a fake, because we're creating that feeling. Now, can you also remember a time when you were scared and you made an excuse? You backed away. You ran to your cave. Did you feel shame or regret? I bet after you did the really scary thing, and Peter, I'm sure you probably felt it as well, you felt great because your brain's reward center gives you a little hit of enzymatic ecstasy. You feel on top of the world. When you ignore that primal warning system and you do something brave, you literally flip a switch in your brain. Now here comes a nerd alert. And if you look at this next slide, you literally turned on the part of your brain called the SGACC. That's the little green part in this slide here. The SGACC is the subgenual anterior cingulate cortex. It's much weaker than the amygdala, but that's our courage center. We can reprogram that. We can make that stronger. For those of you who saw Tara Swartz's webinar a couple months back, she was talking about neuroplasticity. That's what we understand happens here. So in this amazing study, Israeli researchers put people who were afraid of snakes. Now these people admitted they were scared to death of snakes. They put them in a functional MRI machine. That's one of those long coffin-like tubes where you can monitor brain activity. And in the far end of it, on a track with a snake on it, was that snake sitting in that little wagon thing. And what the researchers gave them was a little button inside the functional MRI machine. And they said, move that serpent as close to your face as you possibly can. Now, not surprisingly, most of the people moved the snake away from themselves. But there were a few brave souls who actually brought it closer. And something incredible happened. The amygdala shut down and the SGACC lit up like a Christmas tree. They activated their courage center. They activated it by choice. And that's what we all need to do in these times of uncertainty. So I'm going to give you a couple tips, and you're about to learn how we can do that. But a lot of you have seen just the opposite at work lately. Ineffective leaders choose fear and they default to their defense. Rather than take a risk and look bad or make a mistake, they scurry back to the cave, to their offices. Great leaders do just the opposite. They empathize, they get inquisitive. They replace judgment with curiosity. But fear not, we can all change. So here's the spoiler alert. I lived. With this new immune system, my first stop after Hopkins was the Leesburg Airport in Virginia. I was going to take flying lessons. Now, I'm not going to kid you. I had to pee 4 times before I went out to the plane the first time because I was so terrified. It was even worse the second time because we went over the mountains and I hit a bunch of turbulence in this little tiny plane. I actually pooped myself, just a little bit. But I kept telling myself, I'm doing this and I'm saving my daughter's life by doing it. So I'm going to keep doing it. And something really amazing happened as I kept strengthening the connection to the Courage Center. I realized that the heightened state meant for fight or flight was helping me learn faster and act more effectively. I was using the fear response to become a better pilot. It was like every moment was in super saturated high definition. I remember the smallest of details, from smells to sounds to sights. And before I knew it, a miracle happened. I got to the other side of my fear and I fell in love with flying. That's right. My biggest fear became my greatest passion. I got my private rating, my instrument rating, my commercial rating, a seaplane license. But that's not all. Today, I fly a stunt plane doing exactly what would have terrified me 16 years ago. So facing my fears also made me a much better leader, and my business took off and my relationships got much deeper when I started to connect to the Courage Center. So I was wondering how I went from Diary of a Wimpy Kid to Captain Courageous. And I asked a neuroscientist. He was the one who explained all about the amygdala to me, then started introducing me to other researchers. That started that 6-year journey with all the information from those top neuroscience researchers that's in my book, Fear is Fuel. I wanted everybody to have a handbook. So reprogramming your brain requires that you believe you can change your mind. Neuroplasticity, as Tara showed, proves that it's possible at any age. If you want to become creative, you can at any age. If you want to become brave, you can at any age. When you feel those telltale signals of the amygdala pushing you towards your cave, first you've got to acknowledge the discomfort. It's okay. Feel it, and then remember to breathe. Breathing is the first line of reprogramming. Stop right now and take a breath into the count of 4. Hold it for a count of 4. And let it out to a count of 4. Now hold it out to a count of 4. That's called a 4x4. If you do a 4x4 for just a few minutes every morning when you wake up before you get out of bed, you'll literally change the cellular structure of your brain in the first week. That's all the, quote, meditation that you require. And then when you get in a situation where you're really under stress and you're under threat, if you fall back to what you've been practicing, do a few 4x4s when you feel those telltale signs. That sends a very powerful signal to your brain that you're not under threat. Now here's a nerd alert. Neuroscientists call this bottoms-up information. If you are under threat and you are in danger, your brain figures you'll be breathing fast and quickly. Because you've got that steady breathing, your brain figures, well, you must be safe. So that's the first way of first line of programming. The second one is even easier. Smile, no matter how fake it might be. Emory University had subjects watch horror movies with a chopstick clamped between their teeth, so they'd flex the 42 muscles in their face for smiling. They found something incredible. Just flexing those smile muscles without even thinking about something happy reduced cortisol by 80%. So that old adage, grin and bear it, that's now a scientific maxim. So breathing and smiling are two very effective ways to reprogram your brain. Those are the first two things I want you to start with. There's a lot more in my book if you're interested. But to really change, to dramatically shift your life and get rid of all those roadblocks that might have been holding you back from everything you deserve, you've got to look for choices that make you uncomfortable. You've got to switch this fear center from an early warning system for danger to an early warning system of opportunity. You see, all of our decisions come down to being made either out of fear or out of opportunity. If you choose opportunity, that's where happiness, fulfillment, growth, and success lie. That's your Garden of Eden. Lastly, courage comes easier if you have a strong motivation for being brave. And researchers at Georgetown University found that when we have an altruistic motivation, acting for someone we love, like I did for my daughter, not only is it easier to connect to the courage center, but the rewards your brain produces, those little shots of happy enzymes, are stronger, and we feel better by doing good things. It might seem selfless, but in fact, we're actually helping ourselves by doing altruistic things. So those are the first few lines of code you need to reprogram your brain. Breathing, smiling, choosing to take courageous steps for someone you love. After I almost died, I realized the essence of life is uncertainty. I decided we have to embrace it. When I felt that tug of the amygdala pulling me back to the cave, come back, it's safe, I turned the other way. When I caught myself judging others, I said, be curious, enjoy the discomfort, act courageous, then you'll feel courageous. Use fear as fuel, and every time it's easier and easier. Anyone can reprogram their brain for an amazing life. You can start doing this today by using the science and trusting that when you leave your cave, when you step out into the jungle, you'll find your Garden of Eden. And that adventure won't feel like fear anymore. It'll feel full of happiness and love. And you'll be doing it for the ones in your life that mean the most. Thank you all so much. And I think we've got a good 5 or 6 minutes to take a couple questions.
Great. Yes. Thanks, Patrick. This has really been a lot of amazing commentary and questions coming in as you've been talking. So we won't get to all of them. We will follow up with an article that will try to capture some more of them. But a couple of themes I've seen coming in. One, which I think is quite fascinating given what you're saying, is from your experience and this journey you've been on, how do you differentiate between courage and recklessness? people are worrying that if they apply these techniques, then maybe by being fearless, they might actually become dangerous. What do you think?
Well, there's two things that I'd point out there, Peter. I never want to become fearless. So fearless means you've adapted so much to a stimulus that you don't get that amygdala response. And I think there's a tremendous benefit both to our health and to our performance if we use that amygdala response, if we use that fear cocktail that our body produces to make better decisions. So I don't want to become fearless, and I also don't want to become reckless. Courage is simply acting in the face of fear and acting to the best of your ability. So being able to clear that working memory, because what happens when the amygdala hijacks us, that working memory I was talking about is like a cell phone. You can have as many apps and as much information as possible on it, but you can only use one at a time. So the amygdala tries to put fight or flight up there. If you can clear that when you're in a state of abject terror or fright, and you can put up something that says act rationally, like the way Sully did when he landed a plane on the Hudson River. He might have been terrified, but he was able to clear the fight or flight response and then put something in his brain that says, I've got to follow my job and follow these tasks. That's courage, and that's what keeps us from getting reckless and just recklessly fighting against that amygdala response.
Okay, that's interesting. So related to that, and you gave a couple of examples just now of ways that we can train ourselves and train our brains. But a lot of people are wondering how important is that challenge of training ourselves for particular scenarios that we might find ourselves in where we could be paralyzed by fear. How important is sort of context-specific training from what you've experienced?
So it's less important than the overall, let's say, brain fitness training. So if you want to exercise your brain, do some sort of brainer-cise, the more you can get used to, the whole point of scaring yourself every day is to get used to that feeling of discomfort. Because most people will start to get an amygdala reaction. They'll start to feel their fear tells, and they'll move away from it because they've been told to avoid their fears or get over their fears or don't listen to their fears. And what I suggest is that you move towards it because you're getting more oxygen to the brain. The blood-brain barrier opens up. Anything unnecessary like digestion or empathy stops working, and you get poised for better decision-making. So when you feel that uncomfort, that discomfort, if you can start to get used to it, you're connecting to that SGACC. It can be because you hold a snake and you're terrified of snakes. It can be because you get up to sing karaoke or make a toast. All of those things are teaching you to fire those neurons together to your courage center, the SGACC. And those neurons that fire together will wire together. So using that same pathway becomes easier and easier.
One final quick question just related to this thread. So that's kind of the immediate response. How important is also the cognitive aspect of the response, that you're actually rationalizing the situation that you're facing? Is that essential, or is that something which people don't need to do?
Well, if you assume that the stakes aren't very high, if you aren't about to die and you have time, then it's critically important. Because what happens is we make decisions with 80 to 90% of our decisions are made by the subconscious mind. And that subconscious database is populated initially by an awful lot of other people. So we've got, we don't choose where we're born, the language we speak, the color of our skin, the number of brothers and sisters we have. All of those things get populated for us, yet that's how we make subconscious decisions. Do we have time to put up one last question, Peter? And I'll point out.
I think we're actually just about out of time, so unfortunately,
okay.
We'll invite you back for a follow-up, because there was so much interest here from the audience. We'll figure out a way to do that.
Well, I've got a great way to show people how making those quick subconscious decisions can really be detrimental to performance. So I would say if you have time, evaluate it. The other thing I wanted to point out is there's a fun test on my website where people can evaluate their fears and see what areas of the 8 possible areas to work on. So they can try that if they're interested in more information as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Patrick. There's so much to cover on this topic, and on behalf of everyone that's been tuned in, thank you so much for spending this time with us. I think our first ever guest appearance has been a big hit, so thank you for agreeing to do this. Thank you all for joining us today. Next week, we are delighted to be joined by my colleague, Professor Fiona Murray, who is also one of the Associate Deans for Diversity and Inclusion at the MIT Sloan School. And Fiona is going to talk to us about her research on leading innovation and inclusion. So watch out for that. Sign up for next week. We hope we'll see many of you then. Thank you again, Patrick. Thank you all for joining us. Please keep on innovating, be courageous, and of course, be safe.
Thank you, Peter.